Hello, everyone, and welcome back to week 16 of Anthropological Theory and 482. It is the 1st of May. Welcome back. We're down here in week 16. We're going to be doing 3 more of our presentations today. And then on Friday, I think we will do a review on Friday because I don't think we'll have time for it today. We'll see how far we get into it today. We'll see if we have time for our review. If not, we'll review on Friday and then we'll be done. So we're very close to the end. You have test number 3 coming up due Friday. So let's get to it. So we have 3 presentations. We have Alicia, we have Gavin, and we have Allison all up for today. So without much further ado, let's jump right into it. Who would like to go first? Perfect. Oh no. No need to keep score. There we go. And we have coffee as a total social fact. Let me get you set up here. That's this first. You know, the clips or videos or anything. All right. First up, we have Allison Davis doing coffee as a total social fact. Take it away.
You guys have heard me present before. You know, I have a disclaimer. I've been told I talk like a Texan, which means I talk really fast and really loud. So if you can't understand what I'm saying, yell at me and I'll try to slow down. But today I'm going to be presenting to you guys on coffee as a total social fact, or at least that's the goal. I'm going to be going over why it's a total social fact, some of the theories I have chosen for this paper, and some of the findings in conclusion. Really quickly, I'll just go over total social fact. So total social fact has implications throughout society. It's a cultural norm in a given society. Okay, so to start out with, I'm going to talk to you guys kind of about the life of coffee and where it starts out and how it gets to your cup. So this bottom picture right here is what people like to call the cherries of a coffee tree. It has inside of it the coffee beans that you know and love, which are actually, before they're roasted and dried, the seeds to a coffee tree. So once a coffee tree is like 5 or 6 years old, it starts producing blooms, which produce these cherries. After that, the pulp and fruit is separated from the bean and it's left out in the sun. Traditionally, it's left out in very large sunbeds like these and literally just left outside to dry out so they turn a brown color. From there, it is shipped out all over the world. So one of the major coffee is actually produced and grown on 6 of the 7 continents. Antarctica is the only one that it's not. And whenever coffee is roasted, it's actually roasted by individual companies to ensure that they have their own unique flavor and their own unique taste. From there, you go to Walmart, you pick up your bag of coffee, and you make yourself a latte like I do. Okay, so to go along with this, and these images were not blurry when they were on my laptop, so I'm sorry if you can't see them. But so to go along with this, you kind of heard how coffee beans go from like Ethiopia or Brazil are 2 major exporters of coffee beans and how they go around the world, which leads me into theory 1, globalization. So globalization was developed by, and Gavin just told me how to say this name, and I'm going to butcher it, Arjan Appadure? Somewhere in there, like Dr. Stanley can correct me. And he developed this concept of scapes, right? He has 5 scapes. And this idea comes from landscapes, right? The way culture spreads across the globe, the same way that landscapes change across the globe. And he came up with 5 scapes to go with that, which I will get into a little bit more later. All right, my second theory is materialism. I mainly focused on Marvin Harris's view of materialism. So Marvin Harris's idea of materialism was that everything that holds sacred, religious, cultural value actually has economic value to it, which is why it's important. It's one of the main resources we have, or it produces a lot for the economy. Basically, there's an underlying motive for why it's part of the culture, part of the, like seen as sacred, I guess. My third theory is ritual and passage, which I was focusing on Victor Turner and his rite of passage. So Victor Turner developed the idea of rite of passage, which has 3 different stages in it, from basically like it's a ceremony of change, for lack of a better term. And so his 3 stages are separation, liminal, and integration stages. And the idea is that you start out separated from what you know, you go through a process of change, and you emerge into society with a different worldview, as a different person, with a different status. Okay, so one of the reasons I chose coffee is because it's one of my favorite things, and it's considered a social drug. So one of the things I wrote about in my paper was that author Stephen Topic wrote it as a social drug. And I lost my notes, I'm sorry. Because it's a social drug, it carries a lot of underlying implications. So like the phrase, let's get coffee, means let's go have a conversation, right? It doesn't just mean let's go drink a cup of coffee. And so because of that, it's world known, and it's a very, very interconnected, which is what I think makes it one of the total social effects. So whenever I now analyzed all these theories, the one that I saw that applied the best was globalization, and this idea of the 5 escapes. And so just like I was saying earlier, where it has social implications, it flows into, it's up there, it's fine, you can see them. It flows into different areas of different cultural scapes. So like ethnoscape, right? Ethnoscape is the idea of people taking their culture with them, like immigrants and tourists. Coffee started out in South America, and it made its way throughout the entire world. Technoscape, so the way coffee machines and coffee grinders and even those kinds of things, like you can have a pour over, an espresso machine, like there's so many different options that have come from different places and different resources that have made its way across the world culturally. Mediascape, right? To do most of this assignment, all I had to do was Google coffee, right? And I came up with all kinds of things. You can find coffee on the internet everywhere. And a lot of coffee shops have their own Instagrams, and I see it all over my feed. And then Financescape is a little bit harder to fit it to, but you can see it in the way that coffee is traded globally. And so it's like $45.6 billion is traded annually of coffee. Like that's how much it's worth. It's the 109th most traded export, most traded good. There's the word I'm looking for. Most traded good in the entire continent. So one of the cons I had to trying to fit this theory of scapes and globalization was the idioscape. So idioscape, according to Apparardi, how do you say his name? Apparai, thank you. According to Apparai, is that it's spread through politics and through leaders, and it's just the general thoughts and ideas, right, that are spread through the leaders of the country. Coffee is not a thought or an idea, it's a tangible object. And so trying to fit it into the idioscape concept of globalization was a little hard. So that was one of the cons I came up with applying globalization to this. Other theories that I thought were really interesting to apply to coffee was gender, that I sadly didn't get to. Just because there's certain stereotypes that come with gender and coffee. For example, a man drinks his coffee black, and only a woman will drink pumpkin spice lattes. And I just thought that was kind of interesting, the way that those kind of gender stereotypes flow with coffee, but I didn't get into it very much. So in conclusion, which I feel like I didn't get into everything I wanted on my notes because I was all over the place, but in conclusion, coffee covers a wide range of culture. Like I said, it's grown on 6 of the 7 continents. It holds a much more social value. In fact, like I said, Topic called it a social drug. So it holds much more social value than just being a good produced. And it shows connection. And because it connects people, and it connects people, and it connects communities and just globes through trade and through getting a cup of coffee, that's why I think it's a total social effect. Does anyone have any questions?
Thanks so much.
Yes, Emily?
Could you go a little bit more into like your theory of ritual? How that connects to coffee?
Yeah, okay, so
You go back.
oh, wrong way. Okay, so my idea when it came to ritual was I focused on it's a little bit of a stretch, but here was my idea, was the rite of passage idea. And so so sometimes, like whenever you've heard the phrase when you wake up in the morning and it's like, don't talk to me before I have my coffee, you know, that was my idea, was separating yourself from society, right? Because you haven't had your coffee. The ritual of making your coffee, which is, if you're like me and you have an espresso machine, There's a lot that goes into it. You got to have the perfect texture of grind on your beans, the perfect water temperature, the perfect pressure. And then whenever you make a hot latte, you have to make sure your milk is the right temperature and the right texture. Like there's so much that goes into it. And so that whole ritualistic of in the mornings, you separate yourself and then you go through and you make your perfect cup of coffee and then you re-emerge into society caffeinated. And so that was my idea of applying it to like ritual and rite of passage. It's a little bit of a stretch because Turner likes to apply these kinds of things to marriage and baptism, like big events in your life. But as I was thinking about it, I was like, you could almost apply it this way. And so that's what I tried to do in my paper.
Can you go back one more slide to your material slide?
Yes.
Yeah, so talk us about this slide a little bit.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I told you my notes were all over the place and I was like not in this, so my bad. But so Marvin Harris's idea, right, is that everything that has social value, so like getting a cup of coffee, actually holds underlying economic value. And so like I said earlier, it's the 109th most traded good. I did a research paper in English a couple semesters ago, and I learned that students spend almost $12,000 a year on $1,200, there we go, $1,200 a year on coffee, right? College students alone. And so this is a huge industry and puts a lot of money back into the economy. Like I mentioned earlier, $45.6 billion in trade alone. And so when you add just from college students spending that much money from trade and then everybody else buying their coffee, it just puts a lot of money back into the economy and circulating. So that was my idea.
Any other questions?
What you were just saying about like, that there's a lot of money. I would also say that like a lot of college students prioritize like nice coffee over like single meal. Like if they have only $5 in their bank account, they're gonna spend that on coffee. And not
Yeah.
something.
For sure, it's actually really crazy. Like I said, I did this paper a couple semesters ago, but a lot of people, so if you make your coffee, right, you only spend $50 a year or something crazy if you make your own coffee every day. But when college students are interviewed about it, it's all about the aesthetic of going to a coffee shop and getting a coffee. And so people pay for the aesthetic rather than the coffee most of the time. So yeah, it is pretty crazy. Another thing I want to touch on materialism is not only does it hold underlying monetary value, but also coffee is known for like medical value, also like fixing a headache if you have one, you know, helping if you're got shaky hands like I do, you know, it helps regulate some of that. And so that's another reason why it's more Marvin Harris's view of materialism.
Good one.
What is that curious? Well, did you, in your research, you find a reason why often things is sort of back, not just in the US, but around the world? Or was it more than just for the
I think it started out as, if I remember correctly, it started out historically as the medicinal value of it. So like fixing a headache, and then, you know, hundreds of years ago, they also thought it had a little bit more because of the caffeine in it. They thought it had a little bit more of a medicinal / spiritual value to it. And so because of that, it kind of spread throughout. And then once Europeans got a hold of it, it kind of just became more of a social drink, and it's just a popularity.
All right, well, thanks so much. Awesome.
Sorry that was all over the place, but thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, who would like to go next? There's only 2 of you left. All right.
Do this, that. All right, Felicia, you have a witchcraft in the modern day. Take it away.
Sit. Okay, I don't know how to make this go forward, but just a disclaimer, I completely forgot that there was a template for the PowerPoint. So it's not gonna follow that exactly. It'll follow on kind of sort of like my paper does. But my bad, I completely forgot. I was doing this at like 9 o'clock at night. So my paper was over witchcraft in the modern day. I did not know how to make this go forward. Oh, there it is. Okay. So what it was about was how cultural relativism, interpretive anthropology, and symbol and ritual play into the subject of witchcraft as it applies to the modern day. So witchcraft is a very broad subject. I'm pretty sure we all can agree. It's hard to interpret it, but I was able to interpret it through these 3 specifically. So cultural relativism, I can't say that, sorry. Cultural relativism is used in the modern day witchcraft by allowing the act of witchcraft. I can't see where that is. These work as my notes, I'm sorry. Witchcraft to reflect as a culture. This can be done by the use of what I specifically focused on, which was tarot cards, herbs, crystals, and I touched a little bit about the Ouija board. Each can be used as part of the culture and therefore should be used to better help understand the culture as a whole. So basically with tarot cards, it's a form of divination. So you can apply the culture to that by the use of the tarot cards specifically into the divination aspect of it, and it'll give you a better sense into it. Herbs are used in medicine, basically. You can even find it in other societies as well as like other indigenous tribes. They use herbs and stuff as well. Crystals. I'm pretty sure everybody in here has probably heard that amethysts protect people. Or obsidian is a protection stone. So there's this sense of culture applied to it by the act of, I lost my chain of thought. Yeah. By the way that it is used in that culture specifically. Like for instance, right now I'm wearing amethyst because I have a very high in-tuneness to the spirit world, so I use protections a lot, which is why I mainly use crystals. The Ouija board, I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. All I'm going to say is if you use it, be careful. It is a very powerful piece of magic, and it is also a portal. Okay, interpretive anthropology. So what I did was I did the use of thick description as the interpretive anthropology, which, because I have insider knowledge, because I do practice witchcraft, it gives a better explanation on how you use witchcraft in a safe way versus a bad way, and it can be used to destigmatize the fact that witches are seen as bad instead of seen as healers, which are what most witches in the modern day are. And symbol and ritual. It's very easy to apply symbol and ritual to this because you have the objects and you apply a type of ritual to it, and the objects become the symbols of that ritual. And like tarot cards. Tarot cards by themselves aren't very powerful. You go through a process, I don't know how to describe it, but you go through a process, and as you use the tarot cards, they become the symbols of what you're going to interpret as you're reading it off to the other person or to yourself. A Ouija board is a very good example of this because the Ouija board is both the symbol and the ritual at the same time because it does open portals to the other side of the dimension, and it can be very dangerous if not done correctly. So in conclusion, witchcraft is done mainly through thick description of people who practice it and is able to explain it better than that, which I did in my paper. I feel like I butchered this, but through that thick description, you can apply cultural relativism to it and then apply that to the culture itself. Therefore, it becomes a single culture versus something that is stigmatized as, for lack of a better word, bad. And that's basically all I have. Any questions?
Thanks so much.
Yes.
So with the fact that you brought up cultural relativism, so cultural relativism is the idea that there's not one correct way or one correct culture.
Yes.
And so how does like these aspects of witchcraft that you brought up connect to the idea that there's not one?
Because witchcraft, it depends on who you go to and what they do. Some people specifically do tarot, some specifically do crystal, some specifically do herbs. For me in particular, I do all three. There's some who do more. It really depends on each person you go to. Therefore, it's an interpretation of that culture upon a person from person to person. Does that?
So basically like there's no right way.
Yeah, there's no right way, but there is definitely a wrong way.
Right.
Unfortunately with this subject, because if you do it the wrong way, then bad things happen. You can have demons come out, you can have bad spirits hit you, you can curse somebody, just name off a few. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
What was your ethnographic aspect?
in my paper, what I described it was, I described each aspect the best I could as how I interpret it like crystals. In my paper, I mainly went into the fact that they're used for protection, where herbs can be used to create any type of spell that you really want, where herbs can be used for protection, for love, for clarity, for procrastination, where tarot is specifically usually used for divination. So I described all three differently as a better way to help you understand it. Like tarot, since they're used specifically for divination, they're considered not to be good if they're in the wrong hands. I've heard some horror stories about it. Where crystals and herbs are more of the pure magic that is out there in the world, so they're not as easily tainted by the evil as, say, the tarot or the Ouija board. Does that help? All right, any other questions?
What theorist did you use for your three theories?
Who did I use? I used Gertz, Mead, and Douglas. Don't know how I remembered that. Are there any other questions before I start? All right.
All right, thanks so much. Back, Gavin.
Anthropology of drag. Take it away.
So my paper was on drag as a performance art as a whole, not any one specific aspect of drag. The theories I used were structural functionalism, focusing on Ruckman's views on rituals of inversion. Symbolic anthropology, I used Turner's rites of passage, and interpretive anthropology, kind of a combination of both Grindel and Geertz, some thick description, and just using it to look at multiple different parts of society. So drag is a performance art that involves cross-dressing as a different gender for comedic or burlesque performances. It originated in British theater in the 14th and 15th centuries when women weren't allowed to perform on stage. So men would play female characters disguised as women, and quite a few actors made their entire careers off of it. So when women were allowed to perform in the theater again, they kind of lost their jobs. And so they moved into like burlesque clubs, and the vibe became more playful and comedic. And the one thing that sets drag as a performance art apart from other forms of gender nonconformity, like just cross-dressing for fun, is the creation of a theatrical identity. One common theme that drag performers say is that their character, their persona is entirely different from pretty much everything I've ever read is the performer describes themselves as introverted or quiet, and their character is always boisterous and loud and in your face. And so the theatrical aspect of it is really what makes it a performance art and sets it apart from other areas of gender nonconformance. And I say that drag is a social fact because it has obvious ties to gender, but also sexuality, in that it is deeply rooted within the queer community. A lot of the original drag performers were self-identified as homosexual, even Shakespearean English. And as time went on, the art became synonymous with homosexuality, and today is also has a lot of ties in like transgender communities and politics and religion. And one of my favorite parts of the drag world is the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, who are a drag troupe based in San Francisco, who, as pictured here, dress as nuns in drag. And they do a lot of community outreach, a lot of activism and bring in the religious ties to drag. So for structural functionalism, it views a society as machines with every individual part working to meet the needs of a whole. And in Gluckman's perspective, kind of focuses on the way rites of inversion or subversion relieve the tension that's built up from participating in social norms and upholding all of those ideals. And I actually came across a lot more papers using like Gluckman's theory on drag than I expected to. And the one thing that they all kind of came to the conclusion together is that, yeah, drag does serve to release the tensions built up from societal gender norms and roles. And it is definitely a ritualized inversion of gender norms, but it doesn't account for the creation of new gender norms that drag has created. There's a significant difference in the way a male who doesn't do drag is going to present himself and carry himself than a male that does do drag outside of drag. So that was the one flaw with Gluckman's view, is that it doesn't exactly hold up. And for symbol and ritual, there's the Turner really focuses on the like rites of passage and transition, and with the separation, liminality, and reincorporation during those rituals. And drag as a ritual, the performer goes backstage and becomes separated from the rest of the club or their family or friends that are there with them, and enters a liminal stage where they're no longer male or female, regardless of what their assigned sex at birth is, or what they identify as, or what their character is. They go through the transformation, like pictured here, backstage, and go on to their stage and do their performance. And the entire point of the performances is that they are neither male nor female, but they're both at the same time, and also neither, until eventually reincorporated, coming back off stage and out of costume. Another thing that I realized while I was writing my paper was that Turner had the line, put a man's head on a lion's body, and you think about the human in the abstract. And if you dress a man as a caricaturized, stylized version of a woman, you think about masculinity and femininity in the abstract. Or if you dress a drag queen as a nun, you think about the relationship between the Catholic Church and queerness and how that antagonistic relationship. But what it doesn't consider is the political and economic elements that are present in drag and make it a total social fact. So with interpretive anthropology, it's taking one thing like drag and using it to examine and analyze many different aspects of the society it exists in. And one of the first ties that drag had as it was developing was its ties to sexuality and gender, but also class. Because a lot of the original drag performers weren't well off, weren't working class even, and a lot of them also relied on sex work in their off time. And that created a class divide within the queer communities, even in the 19th and 20th centuries, when there still wasn't a huge queer community. But that extended to today even. There's a lot of class antagonism that you wouldn't necessarily recognize as class antagonism within the queer community, especially in the early 2000s when queer rights activism was focused more on we're just like you instead of we're here too. with an assimilation kind of drive of, see, we can pretend we're straight, but drag queens kind of ruined that mirage. And there's also the drag bans across the country in different places that are being used to police transgender people, or even somebody that's just gender nonconforming. There's the religious aspects, like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence have been active in California since the 80s, and very prominent activist group, do a lot of charity, a lot of community outreach, and fairly synonymous with specifically San Francisco outreach. And we're like would participate in like sporting events and do charity drives in parking lots that were sponsored by sports teams. But the political climate around gender nonconformity has meant that those relationships that the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence have with these other institutions are being broken down. And because the Catholic Church doesn't want their good name ruined, despite the fact that a nun was the one that donated the first habits to the sisters anyway. So I feel that the interpretive perspective works best for a broad analysis of drag, but if you're going to focus on more specific aspects, then structural functionalism or symbolism work very well. Other theories I would be interested in looking at would be like postmodernism and simulation, because a lot of like modern makeup trends are slightly toned down versions of drag makeup trends from 10 years ago, which I found really interesting. Globalization and the rapid spread of drag from urban environments to more rural environments to the entire world, or the fact that drag queen story hours started in 2015 in California and are now a worldwide thing. And structuralism, I think, would be a fun one to look at too, just the way it all fits in together, and like the idea of habitus, and drag is a way to interact with both the queer community and the non-queer community. But in conclusion, drag is a performance art that has a lot of social commentary, ritual, or even like acts of rebellions with a very long history. It reinforces and breaks traditional gender norms and ideals, and encourages an in-depth consideration of many different aspects of society, depending on exactly what their performance is depicting. It can be political, religious, sexual, gender related, or countless any other facets to it. And it really just provides a really interesting look into different communities both within the queer community or the non-queer community as a whole. And I just think it's a really fun thing to learn more about. And there's my references.
Thanks so much.
Any questions?
All right. Time for questions.
Thank you.
My next question is, can you talk a little bit about like the roles in religion and politics for drag being? But do you think like the more negative effects of politics and religion would still make it effect people speaking up against it?
Yeah,
Still involved?
yeah, I'd say it's, if anything, it's been more influential in making it a total social fact because it's been made more people aware of it. So, anything else?
You talk about globalization of drag. Do you see, two-part question, do you see a difference in the 5 flows that Potterai talks about and how maybe it articulates differently? And kind of a follow-up question, is there a cross-cultural difference? We talk about globalization, it's like in this place and in that place, now it's been exported all over around the world. But is there cross-cultural differences in how drag in the Philippines or drag in Africa or in Southeast Asia or something like that is different than maybe it is in.
Yeah, like you can definitely find the different scapes in and I haven't really looked into like how it's different in other countries. I do know that a lot of Eastern Asia has less of a comedic effect to the performances versus like North America and Europe, the Western world essentially like really focuses on the comedic aspect of drag, but in East Asia, it's more aesthetic focused and more just look at how pretty I can make myself versus having such a performance aspect to it. But that's
Are there
really
cultural roots of drag in other cultures, or did you look into it?
I haven't really looked into that much, but I do know that within the US, there's a lot of variation and diversity among drag performers, drag queens, pretty much any race or ethnicity you could think of, who bring their culture into it. I've found Iroquois drag queens, South Indian drag kings. I'm following one on Instagram who is refers to themselves as a gender monster, which I just really appreciate, from Mexico. And so there's cultural influence from every corner of the world.
Other questions? About the impact of media, especially drag race.
I don't like Drag Race because I can't stand RuPaul, but but it has definitely made drag more mainstream, which I feel like has probably contributed to the negative impacts of some of it, because 10 years ago, you didn't really hear much about drag in a political sense, but it became more mainstream, and I feel like that was kind of a starting point for the political animosity.
I think it's really interesting how people who are pretty not associated with the community at all are, they'll be recounting what happened on Drag Race to me like it was football or Survivor or something. Like they're really into like who's winning. It's like, I think that's really an interesting connection between how media exposure is both good for raising awareness, but also you can get these kind of repercussions. Any other questions? All right, thanks, Gavin. Very nice.
And we are just about out of time. We have about 8 or 10 minutes left, so we're not going to jump into the review. We'll do that on Friday. Because your test is a take-home Canvas test, so we can talk about it there on Friday, and then you can go take it. It shouldn't take us, I don't think it'll take us more than 30 minutes to get through everything, because it's a pretty short test. It's only 10 questions, essay questions, no multiple choice, no true and false, just 10 essays, very similar to your other test. But I did want to kind of, before we got done for today, where is this? Stop sharing that. Please, before Friday, take a look at this review sheet. It talks about some of the theorists we've talked about in the second part of the semester or third part of the semester, as well as these concepts. You should be able to, a good way to do this, go through the list. If you know what, James Clifford, writing culture, I know totally about him. Baudrillard, simulation, simulacra. But if you're like McKinnon, I've never heard that name before, maybe check it out and try to figure out, seeing, multi-species ethnography. And then also go through these, see if you know what each of these are. Basically, I go through the essay questions and then take out the key terms and then kind of give them to you beforehand. So we'll talk about these terms and these people on Friday. We'll also read you some questions and we'll try to answer them together. And then hopefully you can get 100 on your test. Remember to at least 6 sentences for each one. And cite relevant texts and authors. People didn't do this as much on the first test, and on the second test they did a little bit better. But show me you read the of readings this semester, right? This is really your chance to shine. And since it is a kind of take home Canvas type test, use all those summaries that you wrote this semester, all those notes that you have, all those pages which you have marked up. You know, show me everything you know. Make me proud. Okay, we're out of time for today. I guess you get out 8 minutes early. That's kind of nice. I'll see you on Friday for our review, and then you can take the test. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'll see you on Friday for our last class of the semester.